what does retention look like? What does continuation, completion, risk factors, student success? A lot of the kinds of things we would look at and leverage models for do depend on a certain sort of stability of the world that I don't think we have right now, and the data isn't going to then support those models very effectively. So I maybe am answering the question for you, and I should turn it back to you all to sort of tell me, again, David, Nick, what are your thoughts on that? Are you suspending the use of them for now? Are you sort of playing around with things to sort of see what's happening and where there might be specific variables that are affected and others that are not? Any experiences so far that you can share that would be useful?
You can play around with them, John, to pacify people, but Greg's right. I mean, we have enough trouble with the margins of error that increase year to year off of internal changes that we make at the university. Different awarding structures, timing of when we release applications, what are you doing at certain points of time with regard to marketing and communication, changing the visit experience, so many things that influence, again, I say student behavior is such a hard thing to predict completely. Now you throw in these sort of acts of God that are all influencing really large scale decisions that students, parents, families are making all around to the question that people want to know. And because it impacts revenue, they want to know, what's the enrollment going to be? What's the budget going to be? What's the credit hours count going to be? How many students are going to retain to enroll? And the answer, it's just impossible to answer because of the way the pandemic has influenced the economy and folks' idea of whether or not this whole return on investment, is college worth it? Are we going to make a decision? There's been, I don't know in everybody's state, but I can speak to the state of Michigan that we've seen, and we were one of the most heavily locked down states and have continued to be. There's been a great sort of economic disaster that has occurred with folks being laid off from jobs and their ability to pay, and that influences, again, students' a student's decision whether or not to attend, and a parent's decision whether or not to send that student. So it's been, John, it's been impossible, and folks can sort of ask internally. I again preface the response with sort of the same response that I've given you to folks, and say, let's focus on trying to evaluate programs at the time being and kind of what's working and what's not, and thinking it like that. But in terms of predictive analytics, it's almost impossible. And then people want to, Nick stated it, Greg stated it, people want to still model, because now we're not only focused on 2020, but they're thinking about 2021. And they're saying, no, just use 19, just use the fall of 19, or just use the academic year, what happened in 2018. And this is going to be a process that kind of, again, it's going to take some time.
If I can, David Kowalski, you've been quite active in this regard, I know, at Montgomery County.
Yeah, like John, like you were saying, it's knowing that how they were constructed and what variables are contained in these models, and that they're that we're off the map. There's no indication that they're going to be sensitive to the current situations. When we had squeezed, I think in Montgomery County, we'd squeezed a lot out of that specific piece of predictive fruit. But also, after a certain time, when you are in stable times, or moderately stable times, you kind of see what the predictive pieces are. You see what those indicators are. So you can take that knowledge on your own and kind of look at against, what's going, and see if those are still holding some weight in your predictions. But yeah, it's nothing we're going to be relying on going forward in the near term to base decisions on, certainly. And I know people have different degrees of, whether you developed it in-house or you're through a vendor, and there are obviously different degrees of insight into which people have on, the actual algorithms behind either a product they purchased or what they've created themselves. So, I think that's a big factor too. But yeah.
Has it changed the conversation then that you have from the sort of data-informed decision-making point of view with the absence of that thing that I think in some places where there may have been relatively advanced use of predictive models, I think people kind of maybe over-relied on them a little bit. If everything is up in the air and you really don't know and everything is sort of a mix, how are you approaching then the decision-making process from sort of the best you can in a time horizon of certainty that is far, far shorter than it was before, because you don't know, are we going into lockdown again next week, or is all these things can all of a sudden make changes. So how is that being approached from your relationship and communication with leadership and decision making?
We're actually pretty fortunate that leadership are willing to, they're not dictating the kind of analyses or the kind of data that we look at. It's more of a toss-up, like, hey, this is what I want to know. Can you help me figure it out? Which gives us kind of the latitude to do what we need to do. So that's fortunate. No one's telling us, hey, go into the, figure out, this predictive piece using this tool or this set of data. And I think ultimately, even in a lot of the predictive models anyway, it's behavioral data, and look at a behavioral data without a predictive model. Looking at how students are behaving, making sure that we're gathering, valuable real-time information, like back to the earlier conversation about tracking data, and how granular you want to get. I'm generally in favor of the position of getting it as granular as you can, getting as much data as you can, as long as you can, as was said, do something meaningful with it, which is not always the case. But there are definitely other types of data that can be used in these situations. And I agree, this probably was an over-reliance by some institutions, some people, some thinking about predictive analytics and what it could do. But this is a perfect situation to show you its limitations beyond what they were already.
Mm-hmm.